hot. And the best way to serve them is when they cool a little bit. But we don't want to wait that long. So we're going to try this and make sure that it's as delicious as we said it will be. The only thing that's missing here is a scoop of ice cream, vanilla ice cream, or maybe a little bit of whipped cream. Abby, this crust, it's crumbling like crazy. It must be good. You want to try it? Okay. Let me take a little bite too. What do you think? It's very good. And the crust is crumbling, which means it's just going to melt in your mouth. And that's exactly what we wanted. Okay, let's get a next plate. Ready? This is going to be good. Okay. And since we don't have ice cream or the whipped cream, I'm just putting a little bit of nutmeg in mine.
Welcome here this evening. If you would please silence your cell phones and be advised that these proceedings are recorded. If you desire to speak to the City Council during the meeting, please complete a request to speak form, and it's available at the entrance. Present it to the City Clerk. Speakers will be called upon at the appropriate time. And at this time, I will call to order the City of Grand Terrace City Council, and City Council is a successor agency, the Housing Successor Agency, for May 22nd, 2018. It's a regular meeting. Tonight our invocation will be given by Father Sonny Sebastian of Christ the Redeemer Catholic Church, and our Pledge of Allegiance will be led by Captain Hector Gomez of the San Bernardino County Sheriff. If you would please stand for invocation and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm going to use Psalm number 104 for this evening's invocation prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. O Lord my God, you are great indeed. How manifold are your works, O Lord. The earth is full of your creatures. May the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the Lord be glad in his works. Pleasing to him be my theme. I will be glad in the Lord. If you take away their breath, they perish and return to their dust. When you send forth your Spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the earth. Lord, send out your Spirit and renew the face of the earth. God, our loving Father, we thank you on behalf of all who are gathered here this evening. Thank you for your many and abundant blessings. You are our stronghold and safety. You are our refuge. Thank you for the ability to be involved in useful work and for the honor of bearing appropriate responsibilities. You are our hope, and we trust in and depend on you. Thank you for loving us from your boundless and gracious nature. In the scriptures, you have said that we ought to obey our authorities, since you have established those authorities to promote peace, order, and justice. We pray for our mayor, for the various levels of the city officials, and in particular for this assembled council. Lord, graciously grant them wisdom to govern even amid conflicting interests, a sense of welfare and true needs of our people, a keen interest for justice, confidence in carrying out the responsibilities of an ability to work together in harmony. May we work always for peace. Be with this council this evening as they discuss and discern on matters concerning the city of Grand Terrace. May your Spirit guide and direct them. Finally, Lord, protect us from all dangers and grant us good health. Lord, send out your Spirit and renew the face of the earth. We ask this through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, through the intercession of our Blessed Mother. Amen.
Amen.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it
Thank you, Father Soni. Thank you, Captain Gomez. Madam City Clerk, may we have roll call, please?
Councilmember Henderson,
Present.
Councilmember Hussey,
Present.
Councilmember Wilson,
I'm here.
Mayor Pro Tem Robles,
Present.
Mayor McNabo.
Present.
Madam Mayor, you have quorum.
Thank you. We have no special presentations tonight, so we'll move to our consent calendar. The consent calendar items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. They will be acted upon by the City Council at one time without discussion. Any council member or staff member or citizen may request removal of an item from the consent calendar for discussion. Are there any requests to remove items from the consent calendar? All right. I see no requests, so I will entertain a motion for the balance of the consent calendar.
Move approval. Second.
Motion by Councilmember Henderson, second by Councilmember Hussey. Please vote.
Motion passes unanimously with Council Members Henderson, Hussey, and Wilson voting yes, Mayor Pro Tem Robles voting yes, and Mayor McNabo voting yes.
Thank you. We'll move to public comment, and this is a time for the public to comment on items not on our scheduled agenda for tonight. Because of restrictions contained in California law, the City Council may not discuss or act on any item not on the agenda, but may briefly respond to statements made or ask a question for clarification. A brief response from staff may also be requested to questions raised during public comment, and a subject may be agendized to a future meeting. Do we have requests to speak for this time? Thank you. Our request to speak comes from David Hahn.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I am here to promote Habitat for Humanity's Inland Empire 66ers baseball game on August 11th and invite the city of Grand Terrace to be there. Tickets are $12 each, with $6 of that going back to Habitat for Humanity to support our new homes to be built in Grand Terrace. And I'll have flyers there at the door that people can take as they leave. I think I've got plenty here for tonight. And as an added bonus, it's Mike Trout bobblehead night. So if you're an Angels fan, or even if you're just a baseball fan, or if you're an eBay fan and want to sell it once you get it, there's going to be very valuable items, and we were lucky to get that night. It's a Saturday night, August 11th at 6:05 p.m., and I'll put the flyers out there on the door.
Thank you, Mr. Hahn. Any other requests to speak on this item? All right, I'll close public comment and come to council communications. We'll begin with Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My comments are brief. I wanted to echo the comments of my colleagues and restate my appreciation for the Grand Terrace Art Show that we all attended. Mrs. Ann Pettis in the audience, I believe I saw her earlier, and want to thank her personally and her comrades in arms in terms of putting together a fantastic event for the city. The setting was great, the music was great, and in conjunction with Friends of the Library, it was a very nice occasion. Along with some of my colleagues, I attended the Gateway Specific Plan scoping meeting in our community center, and was glad to see Planning Commissioner Allen and Planning Commissioner Cesena also attending the meeting along with several of my colleagues. We received an excellent presentation from the environmental consultant for the Gateway Specific Plan. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with this plan, it's available on the city's website. I will tell you that it is a significant project, probably the most significant in the history of the city. And it is bounded by Michigan on the east, the I-215 freeway on the west, Commerce Way on the north, and Main Street on the south. So there will be future announcements regarding community meetings and additional meetings regarding the proposed schedule and how this project is expected to evolve. My last item involves lecture I gave at Cal State San Bernardino last week. The name of the class is Public Administration 617. It's regarding managing local economic development. And when I was an active duty redevelopment director, economic development director, I was involved with 3 other directors and the professor of the class in establishing the curriculum. I taught it for 2 years, but that's really not what this is about. What I wanted to tell you is that I had a discussion, if you will, a lecture on leadership last week to about 25 students who are all Masters in Public Administration students. And I have to say, in my view, that the future is in good hands. If these individuals accede to higher level positions in city and county government special districts, no matter the challenging times we face today, I think we'll do well in the future. I was very, very impressed with all of them. Highly intelligent, highly motivated, and focus on public service and doing good for the community at large. Thank you, Mayor. That concludes my comments.
Thank you, Councilmember Henderson. Councilmember Bill Hussey.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Just a couple of things. Memorial Weekend's coming up, and if you want to volunteer to place flags on the National Cemetery, it's this Saturday from 8 to 11 in Riverside, and the flags are donated. It doesn't take long. You get a group of flags, and you go to each of the burial sites and put a flag there. And then also Tuesday, if you're available to pick up flags, that's the big thing. Pick them up and put them away. That's also from 8 till whenever they're done. I just want to make a comment on Memorial Day, which is May 28th. Remember the fallen who gave their life for their country. Remember the loved ones who are grieving for their loved ones each day. Remember all servicemen and women who came back from the war, who are still struggling every day to cope with their PTSD, and some of them are taking their own lives. And remember to honor this great nation on May 28th for all the men and women who sacrificed for us. If you can, just take a moment of silence that day and reflect on our freedom. God bless, and God bless our military. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Hussey. Councilmember Doug Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor. I have no comment, thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Wilson. Mayor Pro Tem Sylvia Robles.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm legally bound to report on SCAGs because I was a city representative, and we didn't do our reports last time. And for Omnitrans, which also serve as representative of the city, it was some major annual stuff. So I'm going to go through it as fast as I can. The last board meeting of Omnitrans, we heard a state of the agency by the CEO, General Manager, Scott Graham. We received and filed the financial white paper, revenue challenges. The San Bernardino County Transit Authority has become a major source of revenue to the agency. That's the Measure I funds. HDL predicts 2% growth in revenue, while SBCT predicts 3%. Omnitrans has taken budget measures to reduce costs by $500,000. It was noted that 80% of Omnitrans staff will be eligible for retirement in the near future. A special committee was formed to further study the challenges of declining bus ridership, SBCTA revenues, and switch to electric buses. We adopted the fiscal year 2018-19 management plan and restated CEO findings and challenges to Omnitrans. We adopted the fiscal year 2018-19 budget. We adopted the fiscal year 2018-19 service plan, and these are all subcommittees I serve: Administrative Finance Committee and Plans Programs Committee. We adopted the 2018-19 marketing plan. We adopted revisions to personnel policy for the management confidential classifications, and we structured reorganization. We purchased 40 zero-emission buses. So I attended as a delegate for the city for the Southern California Associated Governments, May 3rd to 4th. The delegates' votes were: we approved the general budget and membership assessment schedule. We paid $1,394. We ratified the Regional Council's approval of the SCAG Board of Officer opinion positions. For the consideration of proposed amendments to the SCAG bylaws, we rejected what would have essentially provided for any past president of SCAG to serve as an ex officio row in either a voting or non-voting row on the Regional Council, and not to be subject to the General Assembly schedule. and to be allowed to serve on regional council without selection of their local bodies and enjoy all rights and privileges. And it would also give the same rights and privileges for past presidents who failed to get reelected. So yeah, you're hearing right. We had past presidents that didn't want to go away in the sunset, and they wanted the taxpayer to pay for all their expenses, whether choose to participate in the Southern California Associated Government, and that was resoundingly rejected. The SCAG 2017 accomplishments were to explore opportunities and share best practices to ensure long-term fiscal stability of member jurisdictions. SCAG conducted several pilot projects to evaluate the economic benefit of establishing tax increment financing districts for local projects under new state legislation to capture property tax increment revenue to establish sustainable infrastructure, transit-oriented development, and housing. I attended the breakout session at a crossroads, our transportation future. The panel discussed global issue of declining ridership of mass transit. Panel shared what tactics they are using to increase ridership. Of most interest was the Orange County Transportation Agency's discussion of its rebranding efforts. They renamed it, I didn't catch quite what it was, and successful programs to increase ridership. The final morning session was discussion how state legislation gave local government the power to impose a fee on sales taxes to build roads and highways, etc., and that's the Measure I tax. But Caltrans was not funded in a commensurate fashion to pay for all its maintenance. The Ontario mayor is the new president of SCAG. He gave this talk, and he said, essentially what we were doing is the citizens put Measure I, and we were able to go and pay for all these new roads and highways, but there was no money for maintenance. The panel had the director of Caltrans, executive director of the California Transportation Commission, and senior legislative representative for CSAC, County Supervisors Association. SB 1 was the entire focus, and that's the gas tax. The repeal measure will be on the ballot. Cities were encouraged to spend their allocations quickly and advertise what was done with the funds. There was a discussion that, in truth, the legislature borrowed road money. That road money had been repaid, and there are laws to ensure that this does not happen again. I attended the art show. It was very lovely. The music was a nice touch. I attended the La Postia Italia grand opening. I have regrets for missing the State of the City. I had been on vacation, got my invitation, asked to have to RSVP, but it wasn't put on my calendar. And when you're renovating a home, you're distracted. So that's why I missed it. And I just wanted just a few highlights of the Grand Terrace Women's Club achievements. In the interest of time, I'll just name the ones as far as the local schools. They provided for the Grand Terrace High School $500 in scholarships, for the Grand Terrace High School Library $1,000, for the Terrace View Elementary School Library $250, for the Terrace Hill Middle School Library $500, for the GT Elementary School Library $250. So please recognize the Grand Terrace Women's Club for all their efforts on our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I attended the General Policy Committee for SBCTA, and the major issue on that was that we recommend authorizing placement of assessments on the tax roll related to the Property Assessed Clean Energy Program. This is a program that SBCTA has decided not to move forward with in the future, but what they need to do every year is authorize the continued assessment for those that have taken care of the program in the past. And so there isn't any more funding that's going towards it, but they do have to continue to authorize the ability for those that took advantage of the payment through their property taxes to continue to have that assessed that way. I also attended the Metro Valley study session, and the major issue with that was the preview of hearings to consider resolutions of necessity for parcels on State Route 210, mixed flow lane addition. So that's the area of the 210 out by Highland. They did a nice construction of the 210 from the 215, and it comes out and it's very nice, and then it narrows right as you get to Highland all the way out to Redlands. And so they are going to be doing a lane addition in there. And so with that, they are acquiring property to make those changes. I also traveled with the Joint Powers Insurance Authority to their Executive Committee annual workshop. This is the insurance pool that our city is insured through. And every year they go through and they look at the way that they're providing service to their members. And this year in particular, we looked at ways that we can continue to provide a strong coverage and a strong base of funding to anticipate any losses that need to be paid, but also a way to cut expenses for the members. Now, one of the things that our Joint Powers Insurance Authority does is they make training available to cities to help with hazard mitigation, since they believe that that helps the members to cut down on any claims that might be filed, whether it be for slip and fall throughout the city, workers' comp cases, or any other thing that is covered. They believe that if there's an educational component, that really helps cities to find areas where they need to be looking for these ways to mitigate the hazards and perhaps stop things before they could happen. So they want to continue to do that, but they also know that budgets are cost sensitive. So they're reviewing that for this year to see what can be done without promoting risk of not being able to provide coverage. I thank the Grand Terrace Chamber of Commerce for hosting the State of the City. Thank you for the wonderful ladies who put together the art show, and thank you to all the Grand Terrace residents who provided their art for us to view. It was wonderful. And I want to thank Assemblymember Reyes and Senator Leyva. They each made time to present resolutions on the floor of their respective legislative floors. I happened to be in Sacramento for another meeting the day before, and they were able to accommodate schedules. But traveling for these particular presentations, I want to thank Lieutenant Doug Wolf and the Sheriff's Department for making it so that you were able to be there, and for the Colton Joint Unified School District allowing the principal, James Western of our Grand Terrace High School, to be there as well. And thank you, Mr. Duffy, for the coordination of that efforts. And I'll call that my report for tonight, and we'll move on to our public hearing. So to speak on the public hearing items, if you would please fill out a request to speak form and give it to the city clerk. Each person will be allowed 3 minutes to address the city council. If you challenge in court any action taken concerning a public hearing item, you may be limited to raising only those issues you or someone else raised at the public hearing described in this notice or in the written correspondence delivered to the city at or prior to the public hearing. So at this time, we will proceed in the following way. The public hearing will be opened. Any written communications will be read. The City Council will have questions, an opportunity to ask questions of staff. The applicant, which in this case would be the city, would make comments further. They're not limited to 3 minutes. Any arguments in favor or opposed would come next, and those speakers will be limited to 3 minutes. The applicant can have any kind of rebuttal or follow-up after that. The public hearing will be closed and City Council will have their deliberation. So tonight we're examining the merits of various types of tax measures local agencies can place before voters to enhance the level of services within a community. And so I will open the public hearing at this time, and I will ask city staff to move forward with whatever comments they have at this time.
Thank you, Mayor. For the record, G. Harold Duffy, City Manager. And with me tonight, we have Scott Porter from Jones and Mayer. Scott was responsible for putting together the resolutions that we have before us tonight, the various examples. So on May 8th, 2018, the City Council of the City of Grand Terrace was to consider placing a parcel tax measure before the voters of the city on November the 6th, 2018, the general municipal election, to fund law enforcement services and related election requirements. So after the discussion, staff was given direction. The direction from the council was to return with a list of revenue-generating tax measures, more than just the parcel tax measure that we presented originally. So tonight we're going to have a quick recap of the service level recommendations from Lieutenant Wolf, and then I'll go through the review of the revenue generating measures to accomplish the goals to revenue to enhance the level of services for law enforcement.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. Lieutenant Wolf, how are you tonight?
Fine, thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Council, members of the public. I'm Lieutenant Doug Wolf, and I oversee patrol operations for the City of Grand Terrace. So again, as the mayor said, this will be or the city manager said, this will be a recap of our presentation from last meeting. This right here is our current staffing levels for our Central Patrol Station. Our Central Patrol Station is located in the area of Waterman and 3rd Street in the city of San Bernardino, and that's where the Grand Terrace Patrol Force initially starts their day. They do their briefing there, and they also download at the end of shift there. So out of Central Patrol, our Central County area, and we'll just talk about our manpower, we have 3 county units that are 24/7 with a minimum of 2, but typically we have 3, and then we have 1 40-hour SSS, which is a Sheriff's Service Specialist that assists those deputies Monday through Friday from 8 to 5 with any patrol-related duty that they can help out with. They are a civilian employee. Loma Linda, they have 2 24-hour patrol units. Again, those are 24-hour units every day, 7 days a week. 1 40-hour cover unit that is strategically placed in times where crime is at its highest. We have 2 40-hour traffic units, which also are placed strategically to cover traffic in and out of the city, and also 1 40-hour Sheriff's Service Specialist. Loma Linda University Medical Center has 1 unit 24/7. And also in the event that something goes wrong in the hospital, as you can see, Loma Linda is right there and can respond to help them. San Manuel Casino, we have 2 patrol units 24/7, and then 2 40-hour units that we use as problem-solving cars to, we move around when crime is at its highest. Grand Terrace, we currently have 1 24-hour patrol unit and 1 40-hour cover unit. Grand Terrace pre-2010, we had 1 24-hour unit 7 days a week, as well as 2 40-hour cover units that were strategically placed to cover the busiest times of the day. And we had 1 40-hour traffic unit that helped mitigate our traffic issues within the city. And additionally, we also had a 40-hour Sheriff's Service Specialist. So as you can see, since 2010, the patrol staffing for Grand Terrace has been drastically reduced. Here is our historical staffing levels. As you can see up there, from 2005 to 2007, we had 8 within the contract of Grand Terrace. There were the 5 deputies that were assigned to work that 24-hour. It takes 5 deputies to cover a position 24 hours. And then we had 2 40-hour deputies that worked during those busy times, and then that SSS. And that was from 2005 to 2007. From 2008 to 2010, we had 9 members, department members working specifically for Grand Terrace per the contract. In 2011, it dropped down to 7. And then in 2013 and remaining until now, we have dropped down to 6. And we have, again, the 5 deputy sheriffs that it takes to man that 24-hour operation, and then the 1 40-hour deputy that works during the busiest time. And that would be Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I'll get into that a little bit more for that schedule. So some comparisons. Our 14 contract cities throughout San Bernardino, that's what the sheriff's provides law enforcement services to: Apple Valley, Rancho Cucamonga, Hesperia, City of Highland. They all have, on the average, 0.62 deputies per 1,000 citizens. Grand Terrace, with our current contract, we have 0.48 deputies per 1,000 citizens. Adding 1 40-hour position would bring us up to 0.56 deputies per 1,000. Still below, but much better than where we're currently at. I just want to go over some other numbers that I have here. I don't have a slide for it, but I did talk about them a couple weeks ago, and that is the California comparison cities of cities that are like size in comparison. Scotts Valley Police Department, of a population of 11,500, they have 11 officers and they cover 4.61 miles. Marysville Police Department has 12,000 population, 10 officers, and they cover 3.58 square miles. Sausalito Police Department has 8,700 population. They have 11 officers, 2.25 square miles. Fortuna Police Department, 11,900 population. They have 11 officers and they patrol 4.84 square miles. Sonoma Sheriff's Department, which is a contract city just like us, they have 10,600 in population, and they have 10 officers that cover 2.74 square miles. Grand Terrace, 12,800 in population. They have 6 officers covering 3.5 square miles. Just to go over some of our statistics, as you can see in red, that is 2017. The stats have, we have seen an uptick across the county, not just Grand Terrace, but an uptick in crime. Just to kind of go over some, the first yellow line is violent crimes in total. There is a 27% increase from 2015 to 17, and a 46% increase from 16 to 17. Now that sounds like a large number, it sounds alarming, but it also may have to do with some of the new state statting that we're doing based upon the reclassification of some of the crimes, and we're still trying to maneuver through that. Property crimes, which is the second line down below, yellow line, 2015 to 17, a 3% increase, and 16 to 17, a 1% increase. And then below that are the totals of Part 1 crimes, which is our most violent, which would be murder, rape, torture, stuff like that. We have seen from 15 to 17, a 7% increase, and 16 to 17, 8% increase. Part 2 crimes, which are the lesser offenses, 27% increase since 15-17, and 42% increase from 16 to 17. So as we can see, there is an uptick in crime, but again, some of this could be, and it was explained to me from our stat folks, that this uptick could be from our new statting rules. Okay, for calls for service for Grand Terrace from 2010 to 17. The average that we have going across there is around 13,000 calls for service per year. It pretty much remains the same with the exception of the 2 years in between, which I have no idea why. Before my time. As for response times, they all fall within the state average and our department average and are acceptable call times. This slide here is our total, our goal or average for number of citizens per deputy. The column to the left is our average of the 14 contract cities in San Bernardino County, which is 1,885 numbers of citizens per deputy. The center is where we are at with Grand Terrace. We have 2,133 citizens per deputy, 13% more than the average. By adding that one deputy sheriff, bringing the number to 7, we would bring that number to 1,829, which is 3% fewer than the average. Then this next slide here is calls for service per deputy. Starting from the left, on the average of our other 14 contract cities, our deputies handle 1,509 on the average, 1,509 calls for service on the average. With our current situation in Grand Terrace, our deputies are handling 1,978 calls for service per deputy. By adding that one deputy sheriff, we'll bring it down to 1,895, which is 16% more, still more than the average. So again, it gets us better, but we're still above the average. These are the options that we've presented. Our current staffing and costs, the one 24-hour patrol deputy and the one 40-hour patrol unit is $1.8 million. If money was no object, we would all like to see, I know me personally would like to see 2 deputies out there 24/7, but that would bring the cost up just over $1 million to 2.8, which we know that the city cannot support that. So our recommendation is adding the one additional 40-hour position, which is $328,000. So adding this additional patrol deputy would enable the city to field that second patrol unit during the times when activity is at its highest 7 days a week. Right now, with the one deputy, we're only doing it 3 days a week, and it's typically Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So the other days, there's only one deputy sheriff working in the city. Here's kind of the schedule, or actually the schedule. The top one is the current schedule. As you can see, the bottom 24/7 is the patrol unit. There's 5 deputy sheriffs it takes to fill that P schedule all the way across the board. It takes 5 deputy sheriffs to do that. And then we have the one deputy sheriff, and on this particular schedule, it shows him working Monday through Friday. And the reason why we did that is because when we are running just the one, we were working him 5 days a week. So then we just got more days out of him, 8 hours a day. But as you see, there's 2 days a week that have no coverage with that 40-hour guy. So you're just going to have the one patrol unit on this particular schedule, Saturday and Sunday. But again, we can move that 40-hour patrol person any way we need them. Now down below is the proposed schedule, and it's actually the schedule we're running now with the generosity of the city allowing us to field that second patrol unit with overtime. That's pretty much what we're running down there at the bottom, again on overtime. You have the 24-hour patrol unit, and then every day we have a 12-hour cover car that works from 3 p.m. to 3 a.m. So from 3 a.m. to 3 p.m., there's only one deputy sheriff working patrol. But every single day, and statistics have shown that our busiest time where we need that additional deputy is between 3 p.m. and 3 a.m. So again, that's what that added deputy position would give us. Thank you. Any questions? Or do you want to wait?
Are there questions of Lieutenant Wolf at this time? Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Lieutenant Wolf. I just have one question. You mentioned 2 weeks ago that on average, the Sheriff's Department takes 20 offenders to the West Valley Detention Center. So if there's only one sheriff covering the city, and that sheriff has to take a prisoner to West Valley, is the city totally uncovered?
There is not a deputy assigned, another deputy. We don't send another deputy to, okay, so we have 3 deputies that are working the county. and say somebody from the only single Grand Terrace unit is now sitting at the jail. The only reason we would be sending another deputy to cover a call is a call in progress. Say somebody calls and says, my car is being broken into right now. Then we would dispatch a county unit or a closest unit to that call. But now say, for instance, you call and say, my car has been stolen, and you have no idea when it was taken, it's going to wait until the deputy clears the jail to come take that cold call.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions of Lieutenant Wolf? Mayor Pro Tem.
What I noticed that we don't cover here is the amount of traffic tickets that are given. I'm sorry, you can't just speak from the audience. Lieutenant Wolf?
Yeah, well, we don't have a traffic cop in Grand Terrace.
Yeah, so that's
we
my...
don't, but I will say that that when our guys, and I really do stress to them, when there's no calls for service, there are some hot spots, and we make sure that we get up there. But when we only have one deputy that's working in Grand Terrace, my focus isn't really traffic, it's suppressing crime. But I do reiterate to them that the lights on top of your car stopping other cars does prevent crime.
So I guess I was unaware that without having a specific designated traffic cop, we were just kind of doing that if it was egregious, or we had time to do it?
If we have time to do it.
Okay, because as a resident, for me, the most difficult thing is dealing with people speeding down Palm, Observation, Van Buren. You know, it's clear to me that there are shortcuts that people have figured out. Also, what if people are just in people's mailboxes or stealing packages and those kinds of things?
Well, first on the traffic-related issue, when I get a call from the city of a problem spot, Observation, Palm, Barton, I mean, I get quite a few. I do put it out to our deputies, but my specific words to them are, if you have time, go work these areas, because it's usually just the one deputy in the morning.
Right.
And that's when, and then also a lot of them are at 7 a.m. Well, that's when briefing is, and there's nobody in Grand Terrace at 7 a.m. So it is problematic to try to find the personnel to do that when there's one. And a lot of times these guys are doing follow-up calls from the day before, and that's more important to them than the sitting and monitoring the traffic. They're trying to get their paperwork done and get all of it out of the way so then they can take their next calls.
So essentially we would need a traffic cop.
Well,
I'm going to ask that the people that are here tonight, if you would save your comments to public comment time. Thank you very much.
I think just having another deputy out in the field gives them the latitude of doing more. It gives me the latitude as the manager to be able to say, I need to have somebody sit on this corner. But I can't, it's difficult for me to do that when there's only one out there. I can't lock him down in that corner because he knows the pulse of that city better than I do. And I know every deputy sheriff that we put out there, they have things to do. And I don't want to suppress them doing that. Now, of course, if there is a traffic problem, I do tell them, when you have time, go write some tickets.
Now, one of the questions I would have, because I've been told that there isn't a good deed that doesn't go unpunished. And we took extra pains with one-time money to give you some overtime support. Yes. So it seems that because we gave you that overtime support, folks really haven't seen recently what it's like.
I'm sorry?
What it would be like completely if we were just to what the budget provides for sheriff protection in the city.
Well, that's a good point, and we have talked about pulling that guy or that patrol person back. But I think that it's important for the safety of the deputy, and also what I'm hearing from council and everybody, to keep this thing going until we figure out what the plan is going to be. But we are burning some people out with all the overtime, and I think that you'd get more for your money if we had somebody that was in the position because right now you're just getting that transient deputy that signs up for the overtime. It would be great to have a person there that wants to be there and that goes there and develops the relationships within the city. And I think you'll get more for your money out of that guy.
So one more thing, and then I'll yield my time. I recently visited the Terrace View Elementary for their arts program, and I ran into a number of parents that discussed with me some actual physical fights going on at peak hours of dropping off the children. So through the city manager, I asked if we could do something there, and he said that you could. But again, we're able to do because we're giving you one-time money.
You mean for the overtime?
Yeah.
The overtime guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does make things a little easier for us. So, yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Any other questions of Lieutenant Wolf at this time? Councilmember Hussey.
Lieutenant Wolf, let me ask you a couple of questions. It was about 3 months back, we had one deputy, correct me if I'm wrong, that engaged 3 individuals at Gage Park. Was it just the one deputy by himself?
Is that the one where he recovered the gun?
Correct.
Yes, he was by himself.
So you had one officer by himself at 10:30 at night engaging three people. One took off, the other 2 stayed there, and the one person had a shotgun and plus illegal drugs, correct?
That is, for what I remember, yes.
So we are blessed that that guy didn't turn around with the shotgun and shoot the deputy.
That's correct. That was, I believe, in the morning, though. That was in the morning when there was one deputy working.
Yeah. And then, of course, you know, that deputy did an outstanding job because who knows what might have happened because it was within 1,000 feet from the high school.
Absolutely.
And that was right after the Parkland, Florida shooting.
Absolutely.
And then do we have one deputy only that did that last response that brought in the SWAT team when he come knocking on the door for the?
Yes, it was. He was by himself.
So
That was started at noon, and so the cover deputy came on at 2.
So we're lucky nothing happened to that deputy that day.
Very lucky, yes.
Do we have one deputy that, when that young man, that veteran that decided to shoot up his neighborhood, one of the first response, go there before he called backup?
Yes.
So that one deputy actually helped protect that neighborhood till response got there.
Absolutely.
So I think we're buying our time with just one deputy, correct? We need to have at least 2 here within it, because like you mentioned earlier, if we had the one deputy and he went to go book somebody in Rancho or West Valley, and then we're without a deputy, and that I think we had a call for a crime in progress for some construction equipment, and Loma Linda came up here, but then Loma Linda had a domestic disturbance, so he had to turn back around because that was priority. So the guy actually who stole the equipment got away with it because we didn't have the amount of coverage.
That is correct.
All right, well, thank you, and thank all the deputies for a great job they're doing. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Hussey. You have further questions?
Just real quick.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I failed to ask staff, but when I sat here and we were having budget difficulties, and I don't know if staff wasn't here, we have a changeover staff, but Lieutenant Dorsey came and said, to help you close $200,000, we said, the sheriff will absorb the cost of a deputy, the sheriff will absorb the cost of a number of things until we got to $200,000, and I think staff needs to look that up. But it was one of the budget years, probably 2012, around there, I would say. But there were some give backs to us, and I think we need to recognize that as part of the discussion Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. All right, thank you, Lieutenant Wolf. Mr. Duffy?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. So now let's go over some of the potential options the council has. And so as we discussed at the last meeting, we put forward the parcel tax, which is considered a special tax because it requires a two-thirds voter approval. It requires also a majority vote of the council, which is the minimum of a 3-2 vote, to adopt the resolution placing the measure on the ballot. Also requires council to also adopt the resolution placing the argument on the ballot. Requires council to set rate and sunset date. The use of funds is legally limited by ordinance. So it's a special tax, and it's basically whatever the ballot measure says, you have to use it for that particular purpose. And there's no companion advisory measure included in this, within this parcel tax. So the parcel tax would read, to enable the funding of law enforcement services beyond the current 2,208 deputy hours weekly, shall the City of Grand Terrace collect a parcel tax ending following tax year 2023-24 exclusively for law enforcement services at the annual rate of $80 per single-family dwelling and $45.60 per multifamily dwelling unit. That's not each apartment complex, that's each unit within an apartment. And $100 for non-residential parcels, regardless whether they're developed or undeveloped. The estimate to initially generate about $356,000 annually, with annual rate increases of up to 6%, 6% and a citizens oversight board. And so this is what that would look like over the course of the life of the parcel tax. You'd start out with the $80 for the single family unit and $45.60 for the multifamily unit per multifamily unit and $100 for non-residential parcel tax. You'll see how it'll escalate going down the line. But you'll also see, let's see, because this is multifamily dwelling units, what will happen is when the Lewis family when the Lewis project comes on board, you'll see a slight reduction in terms of the overall number of this number here escalating. The parcel tax proceeds will be the parcel tax proceeds will be deposited into a special fund and then reviewed by the Citizens Fiscal Accountability Board, a 5-member panel appointed by the City Council. So that's a part of the actual measure that would establish a accountability board of 5 members that will be appointed by the council to ensure that the money is spent in its appropriate manner. Also, just to reiterate, the city would have to maintain its 208 hours, deputy hours, in order to access those additional proceeds. This parcel tax is not meant to supplement the existing fund, but to also enhance the level of service. The next item is the transaction and use tax, what we call a sales tax. Requires a simple majority of voters to approve, 50% plus 1. Requires a first reading of an ordinance, and the second reading of adoption of the ordinance requires two-thirds council vote, or 4 to 1 at a minimum. The adopted resolution adopt the resolution placing the measure on the ballot and regarding arguments. Requires council to set the rate and sunset date if there is going to be one. The use of funds implied by wording on the ballot question and by optional advisory measure cannot be legally binding. That means that this would be considered general fund proceeds. And there will also be a measure, a voluntary measure that basically says, should the council use the money for this particular purpose? But it cannot be legally binding. And this is the companion advisory measure is optional. And we'll look and we'll see here. So the ballot measure would say, shall the measure approving a 0.5% transaction and use tax, sales tax, which is estimated to raise approximately $365,000 annually for unrestricted general revenue purposes, such as additional law enforcement services with annual audits of tax revenue and with the final collection of the tax in 2023 be adopted. And there's also an advisory vote measure only. If the voters of the City of Grand Terrace approves the transaction and use tax, should the City Council use the proceeds for a tax solely to fund additional law enforcement services? Now, the thought process would be that if both of these measures pass, then that would be the intent of what's happening. But legally, we cannot bind this to go for law enforcement services. And so to give you an idea of what that sales tax would do and how it would compare to others. So Riverside currently has an 8.75% sales tax. San Bernardino has an 8.0% sales tax. And if we pass this particular measure, we would have an 8.25% sales tax as proposed. Here are some of the other cities that surround us and what their sales tax components are. Colton, 7.75, Fontana the same, Grand Terrace is currently at that level, Rialto's at the level, San Bernardino is 8.0%, Yucca Valley is 8.75%, Riverside is 8.75%, Cathedral City is 8.75%, Highgrove has 7.75%, Palm Springs has a 9.25%, and then Riverside City has 8.75%. So now let's move over to the utility user tax. Requires a simple majority of the voters to approve, which is 50% plus one. When adopted by resolution, placing the measure on the ballot requires 2/3 of the council vote, which is 4-1 at the minimum. The adopted resolution placing the measure on the ballot and regarding an argument. No second meeting or reading is required for this particular purpose. Requires council to set the rate and sunset date, if there's any, and use of funds implied by wording of the ballot question and by advisory measure, but cannot be legally binding, as we said before for the other one. And the companion measure would be advisory. And so this would be the wording that would be listed here. Shall the measure approve a 1.5% utility user tax on telecommunications, electricity, gas, video, water, sewer, and refuse services, which is estimated to raise approximately $345,000 annually for unrestricted general revenue purposes, such as additional law enforcement services with annual audits of tax revenues and the final collection of the tax measure in 2023 to be adopted. And the advisory vote only would also read, if the voters of the city of Grand Terrace approve the utility user tax, should the city council use the proceeds of that tax solely to fund additional law enforcement services? So very much like the previous one, the advisory measure would basically, if both of those measures pass, the intent would be not binding, but the intent would be for that particular purpose. So if you look in your packet pages, there's a more of a complete definition of what the telecommunications is on packet page 249, electricity uses on packet page 250, gas users on packet page 252, video users on packet page 254, water users on packet page 255, and the sewer users on packet page 257. So in a quick summary of this would be, the parcel tax, once again, will require a 2/3 voter approval, and a vote by the council would be a 3-2 at a minimum. And the council approval would be adoption, a resolution placing on the ballot, along with the arguments. The council would set the rate and sunset date. The use of the funds would be restricted, and a companion advisory measure is not required. The transaction and use tax, which is the sales tax, with a simple majority, 4-1 vote minimum for the council, requires 2 readings, the first reading of the ordinance, second reading, adoption of the ordinance, adoption of the resolution, placing the measure on the ballot, and also the arguments. Set the sunset date, rate and date, also use of funds implied but not council, implied but it's at the council discretion. And the companion measure is an optional, which we are adding to this. And the same thing would occur for the utility user tax. It's simply majority, the voters approve, vote by the council, 4-1 at a minimum, and the adoption of a resolution placing the measure on the ballot and regarding the argument. There is no need for a second reading in this particular case. You would set the rate and the sunset date. The use of the funds would be implied, but at the council discretion, and the companion advisory measure is also optional. And so this would be the rates in which we put forward are all trying to ensure that we have the funding for the the extra 40-hour officer. So the parcel tax rate, the rate would be at an annual revenue of $356,000. The transaction and use tax would be at about $365,000. The utility user tax would be at $345,000. The annual amount per household for the single family would be for the parcel tax would be $80 per single family home, $45.60 once again for multifamily units, each particular unit, and $100 for non-residential. That's parcels that are improved and unimproved. And the transaction and use tax would be at 0.5%, and not 50%. And the utility user tax would be at 1.50%. And the sunset date on all of those would be in 2/23. So with that, I'm available for any questions.
When would revenues begin to come into the city?
Okay.
Should any of these pass in November?
Sure, and we can have the attorney help us with that. But as I said previously for the parcel tax last week, what would happen is that because of the parcel taxes collected, would actually start to be collected in August of 2019, we would actually, any money that the council would advance from the general fund could be reimbursed once those monies come in. And then for the transaction use tax, and then
So for the transaction use tax, again, I'm Scott Porter. I'm an attorney with the city attorney's office. The transaction and use tax, that would not begin being collected until, I guess it would be April 1st of the year following, so that would be 2019. And then it would go 6 years. So actually, if you approve the ordinance, my recommendation would be that we make slight tweaks to the ordinance because it currently says 2023. That would be incorrect. It would really be 2024. But because it would still be the same time period, but it would just start a little bit later. As far as the the UUT, that would the ordinance itself states that it would take effect immediately, but generally speaking, it would take 3 months before it would start being collected.
Oops. Any questions of staff at this time? Councilmember Hussey.
Thank you, sir, for coming out. I don't know if you're familiar with the Measure Z in Riverside.
I am not.
Okay, well, the voters approved a sales tax for the same thing for the first responders and to enhance their law enforcement. I guess that's why it's at 8.75. I was just asking if you were aware of that. Right? No. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Mr. Porter. Do we have any more presentations at this time?
That's it, Mayor.
Okay. Do we have written communications to read, Madam City Clerk?
There's an email that I placed at the dais in front of each of you from resident Lisa Wadley, and she just conveyed her opposition, if you'd like it read, but it's not necessary.
Please do.
First and foremost, why must we choose any of these options? None of these is a win for residents. All three will add taxes to private citizens. Number one is a property tax. Number two is a tax on those who rent in Grand Terrace on top of a property tax, so essentially allowing for a double tax. And number three is a tax that we already voted down. It was voted down despite being told that our parks would need to be shut down without the funding. That was a lie. Parks remain open, and the grass was recently redone with fresh sod that is being overwatered. Seems to me they found some way to pay for something when it's for the children. Having a second deputy will really help. Having a second deputy, will it really help response time? Are we guaranteed that a second deputy will be in Grand Terrace and not be off in Colton or Loma Linda when a citizen here in Grand Terrace is in need? The city has money to throw a Grand Terrace day and money for 2 city employees to follow a street sweeper. A street sweeper that was upgraded to a new company that has a camera on the sweeper to record violators. It would seem to me if there is money to waste on 2 city employees to follow a machine that has the capability to record license plates, then the city has a surplus of funds to allocate to enhance the protection of their citizens. Additionally, given that code enforcement is not out nearly every day writing ticket after ticket for everything from parking on your own yard or having your trash can visible from the street or for having your deceased spouse car parked too long in own driveway, it would seem that all those ridiculous fines and money should be put to good use, protecting the citizens of Grand Terrace. Thank you, Lisa Wadley.
Thank you for reading that. Okay, we have no other written comments? Okay, I'm going to open this up to public comment. Are there requests to speak? Thank you. We'll start with Johan Gallo.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council, and staff. Johan Gallo, 22808 DeSoto Street, Grand Terrace. We understand nobody wants more taxes, and easily taxes and tax money gets diverted, and citizens get upset over that. We understand it because we're all paying the taxes. We've seen what the city has done to reduce expenses through animal control changes, IT savings, and other areas. But frankly, with the latest news that we have over $400,000 in pension liability, I don't see us saving another $400,000 to add to the $335,000 we need for a sheriff. I want you to keep in mind one number, 57. That's the number of law enforcement officers that have been killed so far this year. Last one, yesterday, Baltimore, just responding to a suspicious vehicle call. She's dead. How much time do we have to waste waiting for backup if we had a sheriff here? I would encourage the council to move forward with the ballot initiative. We look at California, we're the 5th largest economy in the world, the 49th and the worst and least friendliest toward business. But when we look at what we need to do in Grand Terrace, we can't save $330,000 in our budget. Try as you might, there's only so many things that you can cut and still provide the things that you need for the residents. So I would encourage the council and the staff to move forward with a ballot initiative, let the residents decide, and ultimately, hopefully, they'll decide and make sure that it's important for not only their safety, but those of the officers and deputies that patrol the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gallo. Our next speaker is Jeremy Rivera.
The heckler from the audience, please be quiet.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera.
I live on Van Buren Street, between Michigan and Mount Vernon. I would like for you to come and join me at any time, and we can sit in my driveway and monitor the speed of the traffic. I go up and down Van Buren with my 4-year-old daughter. We don't have a traffic cop, but Loma Linda has 2 traffic cops. They have double the population. So we have half the population. It would be nice to have a motorcycle. I think I saw one. Maybe we were doing some field testing last year or something. I saw one out on Barton Road a couple mornings. That was pretty cool. I worry. My wife grew up here. Things are changing. People go, well, we're only a city of 12,000. Yes, we are. But guess what? Over in High Grove, they get 1 deputy for 8 hours a month. That's next door. And they're building 5,000 houses. Those people are coming to Grand Terrace. They drive up and down Mount Vernon every day. They drive up and down Michigan every day. I worry. We had 9 deputies, I think, that Lieutenant Wolf said back in 2010. How are we paying for them back in 2010? 9? Wow. One question I did have is I don't understand why we have to take prisoners to West Valley Detention Center, which is so far away, and why we can't book them at Central. I don't know if they just don't do bookings at Central anymore, but that seems to make no sense to me at all. If someone's driving all the way out to Rancho to book somebody, that's probably like a 3-hour ordeal, maybe more to book somebody. I don't know what it takes. How many times will Little Caesars get robbed on a Friday night? One might ask. Maybe they need a pizza window like Domino's. That's simple science. How about Dollar Tree? What is it going to be like when my 4-year-old and I are getting a toy at Dollar Tree and it gets robbed? That's not very nice. How about the high-speed chase yesterday down the 215 that ended in Colton? Boy, that was great if you like to watch those on TV. Thank God it didn't end in Grand Terrace, because we would have been undermanned. And poor 40 King would have probably been out of gas the way it went up and down the 91, the 215, the Cajon, back down the 10 around. If you didn't watch it, it's fun stuff to watch on all the major news channels. What was the city's manager's salary back in 2010? What is the city manager's salary now in 2018? What was the staffing like back in 2010 during the budget crisis? We were cut back a lot. Now what is the city staffing? 2 people behind the street sweeper. Jesus Christ. Every week. That's the number 1 complaint in the city from the constituents. And if you don't know that, you better find out very soon. 92313, Facebook has it all.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Our next speaker is Jeff Allen.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor and City Council. I've got my notes here. Jeff Allen, 22549 Brentwood Street. And my questions, I have just a few questions about this that I haven't heard answered. I'm pleased that there's a sunset clause that has been included in the discussion. Must it be 6 years? Because that leads to my next point, which is we know the development that's coming in down by the freeway, and we know that there's going to be some taxes rolling in on that. And if they start, when would we be able to use, even if this gets on the ballot and it does pass, when would the taxes be available for use to pay for a new deputy? And would that be any sooner than the taxes coming from the new development? And if there's some sort of a way that you can finance a deputy on future funding of some tax that's been passed, can you not finance a deputy on the future funding of tax from new developments that are being built? Those are some of the questions that came to mind as I was going and reading about this and listening to the discussion on it. And earlier in a discussion on this, the last council meeting, one of the council members mentioned that it might be beneficial to our fire departments have mutual aid agreements between neighboring fire departments. So that's why you'll see Colton up here or Loma Linda up here, or Grand Terrace might be down there. Why can't police departments have mutual aids? I'm sure they do. But there was some discussion about how some of what happens in Grand Terrace might be coming from Riverside County area or from the Colton area. So if we're so concerned about there not being coverage for Grand Terrace because a deputy has to transport somebody to a detention facility, could another jurisdiction, would the boundaries, like over by Fairburn or somewhere over near the high school, could Riverside, well, I don't know if Highgrove ever gets covered, could the area that's over in Loma Hills, would Colton be kind enough to come in there if there was an issue, and there wasn't someone from our department to cover it? That's the sort of things that the questions that came to my mind. So thanks for your time and discussing this.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Are there any other requests to speak? Thank you. Bobby Forbes.
Good evening. Bobby Forbes, Brent Avenue, Grand Terrace. Number one, special tax seems to me to be the least amount of money out of my pocket, and the most like the petition that we were trying to get signatures on. At $80 per year per property with the 50% fee to the apartment complexes. And it was for 5 years. This is for 6, I think, total. Just seems to me that's the one that I prefer, because I spent a lot of money in Grand Terrace, and you're going to make a lot more money off of me if you're getting me for tax. The tax you're going to raise my taxes from 7.75% to 8.25% or whatever it happens to be. So I'm for number one. My question is the extra deputies that we have now because of the overtime fund or the extra funds that were given out. when is that going to stop? Was that just unlimited, however much money it was, unlimited every year? Or was that for a certain amount of time? Or, is it going to stop at the end of June? Is it going to stop at the end of July? Does it stop at the end of the next fiscal year, this fiscal year? If there's an answer to that, I'd like to know. And again, I like number 1.
Thank you, Ms. Forbes. Any other requests to speak? Okay. So I'm going to close public comment, and I'm going to come back, and under applicant's rebuttal, I'm going to ask if we can answer some of the questions that were raised during public comment. So I think starting with, there were 2 of them, and the first speaker wanted to know about the 10 deputies in 2010, and I think that I would like a comparison between the 10 deputies now and how many we have, because I believe we have 6 now. But how is that paid for in 2010? And then also, would it be possible to do booking at Central instead of going to West Valley Detention Center?
We do book the majority at Central Detention Center, but there are a substantial amount of arrestees who have medical issues, which will not be accepted at Central Detention Center, and then they will be transferred to West Valley.
Thank you. Thank you. And then for the 10 deputies, that compares to 6, right?
Well, that would be city manager.
Yes, Mayor, and it's my belief that at the time that those deputies were paid for through redevelopment proceeds as part of blight and removal.
Okay, but that's 10 compared to 6. That's not 10 compared to 1, correct?
Right.
We had 10 deputies in 2010. That was for 24-hour coverage, 7 days a week.
It was 1 deputy 24/7, and then there were 2 40-hour deputies, and then there was a traffic deputy. Then there was an SSS,
okay,
a civilian employee.
Okay. All right. Then I think there was a question about the sunset clause being 6 years. Is there a reason for 6?
So each of these is drafted so that it would be a 5-year sunset, and there is. We can talk about each one, but each one essentially would allow the city to spend money immediately on police protection services November, 5th. Let's say you might not be getting a check for many months thereafter, but you could end up spending the money and then essentially be reimbursed with the money that's coming in.
And so that answers the question about the future, or when would we be getting the money? And then future, I think there was a question about future funding of deputies against potential development. Is that something that's done?
So this tax would apply prospectively. So that would mean that if 2 years from now you have multiple new homes in the community, well, they would have to pay whatever the taxes may be. So if it's, for example, a parcel tax, well, per parcel they would have to pay. If it is a sales tax, technically a TUT, then it wouldn't be only people in the city that would be paying that tax. It would be people that shop in the city that would be paying that tax.
So, Mayor, let me try to answer that also.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. I think the question was a little bit different than that.
Yeah, and so it would be very difficult to try to go to someone and have them fund you for a potential revenue that you don't have as tangible. For example, if you possibly could, if you had a project in the pipeline and you knew it was going to come on board, but it's very difficult to try to, and risky too, to try to fund something on a potential that's going to possibly happen.
And there would be fees that would be applied to whatever funding mechanism was put in place. Is that correct? Okay. And then there was the question about, is there an ability to use mutual aid with Riverside County and Colton?
That's stupid.
Well, we do that to some regard if it's a SWAT call out or something that rises that level, some sort of an extreme emergency. We all have that mutual aid clause. But for the day-to-day operations, Loma Linda does come here, again, when there are in-progress calls and there is not a Grand Terrace deputy available. But as for working with Colton PD or Rialto PD or Highgrove with the Sheriff's Department, that's probably not going to happen based upon they have their own area of responsibility and their taxpayers are paying for that.
So that would be very difficult to try to navigate through.
All right, thank you.
Mayor, and I might want to also add
Mr. Duffy.
that we have also been in contact with Riverside County's CAO's office because of the number of homes that they're building that abut Grand Terrace. And so we're asking them what's the level of service that they have and how we think that might impact us. So we are having that conversation with the CAO's office. And we're supposed to be meeting again with the CAO. They're going to be talking to the Sheriff's Department and talking about the levels of service that they have. So we can get an understanding of what there's comments that they only have a certain number of hours. We're trying to get the real factors of what's actually being covered in the High Grove area.
All right, thank you, Mr. Duffy. And then the last question was extra deputies are paid for. That was the overtime payments that had been allocated, and when does that
Yes,
end?
and that will end in June. The funding will run out.
At the end of June or beginning of June?
Maybe the middle of June.
Middle of June, okay. And I think...
What time, midnight? Midnight or
3
6
a.m.?
a.m.?
Okay, I think those were all the questions that I heard. Were there any other items of rebuttal that would be made at this time?
No, I have some questions that you didn't, the letter that was read. Okay, now, who paid?
Madam Mayor, I'm
okay.
sorry. May I make a suggestion?
Certainly.
I guess there's no need for any more rebuttal. You're getting into discussion, which is a good thing. Maybe you just want to close the public hearing and go ahead with Mayor Pro Tem.
I will do that. All right, so we will close the public hearing at this time. And Mayor Pro Tem, you had questions, please.
Yeah, I think the person that wrote the letter needs to understand who paid for the grass at the soccer field.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem, that grass was actually paid for by the Colton Joint Unified School District. They actually went through and redid that entire soccer field. The city did not spend any proceeds on that at all.
Now, can you explain your mandates by law for street sweeping and how that's funded and how that's...
Yes, Mayor. Mayor Pro Tem. So there's a national pollution discharge requirement that the city would be required to sweep the streets in order to remove pollutants from the street. Those are actually pretty stringent, and so what happens is we actually get we have a fee on your trash bill that will then go and then it's collected to be able to use to sweep the streets. We actually sweep the streets at a minimum of once per month, but that is a requirement for us to do so.
Now, is there such a thing as Facebook City Hall? Could citizens go on 9213 and have any expectation that we can legally hear them and act upon anything that they talk about on 9213?
No, they really should be coming to the city's webpage, call the city hall, or go to the city's Facebook page. We actually cannot remove comments from our page unless they're offensive, and so we should be monitoring those pages for questions and responding to them.
But if citizens want an action, do they not, need to understand that we're bound by the Brown Act? And perhaps Richard can give a little this overview on that.
Mr. City Attorney?
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the council. The city council acts as one body, and they can take up any item that is placed on an agenda and that has been posted so the public knows what they're talking about. And that's required by the Brown Act. So any decision the council is going to be made is going to be at a meeting like this.
No, and then why do we have the section about public comment of anything that's not on the agenda is so that if you come here and you discuss a concern you have, we can ask for it to be on a future agenda and then act on it as one body. I also want to say, when was Measure C on the ballot?
I believe that's 2013.
How many years ago was that? 5 years ago. So people are talking to me like Measure C was in June, and now we want 6 months later to come ask for the same issue. Also, this city was using RDA money at the tune, I think it was $4.8 million, to cover city expenses, so the city didn't feel it. When the city became a city, there was the local agency formation commission said the city was probably, because it didn't have a strong property tax base or sales tax base, at some point at a 5-year horizon was going to have to do some kind of tax measure to fund itself at the base level. Now, when you become a city, you're supposed to have greater services, and the mandate for cities is for the health and safety of citizens, usually is fire and police. It's not supposed to be the same that you had at the county level. It's supposed to be enhanced. That's just, also, when was redevelopment agencies dissolved?
2012.
2012. Okay, so in 2010, then I wasn't on the council. Why? 2010, the cuts were made because of what?
I wasn't here, but I believe that there was the economic downturn, or I believe that was it.
Okay, so it was the housing?
Housing crisis, yes.
Okay.
Recession, it's called.
You know, we're...
Any further questions?
I was going to say, you're
Mayor
not
Pro Tem?
offending me. It's just that if we had everybody yelling from the audience, do you know what that would be like? Okay.
Okay. Councilmember Hussey.
Mr. Duffy, now the Mayor Pro Tem asked about the street sweepers. It's going to be 3 questions. Can you tell me why we don't use the cameras anymore in the street sweepers? Why we have 2 code enforcement staff? And how much the fine is and what the city gets out of it? Actually, 4 questions.
Yes, sir. I'll try to answer those and have staff help me out with this. So there was a law that had a limited ability to called video ticketing, and it allowed us to be able to mount a camera on the back in the front of a sweeper, and we were able to videotape the license plate. Then once we would turn that in, we would verify the date and time of the violation, and then we would then issue the person a ticket. That law expired in 2016. It required the state to have a hearing on that, and that hearing never occurred, and so we were required to go back to the manual ticket writing. We have talked to our legislator and our senator's office about trying to get that reinstated, because it is a very efficient manner, but we cannot legally do that anymore. That's why we stopped doing it. And so that was one. And the other one was the cost for a ticket is $37.
$37.50.
And the city receives?
$25, but a little bit less than that to cover the processing.
Okay.
Thank you, Director Moore.
And the rest belongs to the state.
And you forgot, why do we have 2 code enforcement instead of just 1? What was the reason for 2?
Well, the reason for 2 was because when the one person wrote a ticket, then she'd fall behind the sweeper, and then so when she caught up with the sweeper, then she would write the ticket. But then we would get calls from people saying, well, why did I get a ticket when you didn't ticket the other car? But what happens is once the sweeper goes around the car, it's already done. And we can't then turn around and write that person a ticket. So that's why you see the employee actually following the street sweeper. If they're not there at the time the sweeper goes by, we don't write the ticket.
Thank you.
Councilmember Henderson, did you have comments?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You know, when this matter came before the council 2 weeks ago, I spoke at length, and I have a few comments to make, but I'll try to be brief, and I don't want to relitigate some of the issues that we discussed. And I've struggled with trying to, to discuss with the community and the viewing audience the vagaries of this particular measure or measures that are before the council. And to put it in common sense terms so hopefully everyone can understand. So imagine, if you will, that your household income in 2008 was essentially the same thing in 2018. Grand Terrace's revenue base in 2018, with some variances, is essentially the same thing as it was in 2008. Now, lay over that the fact that your expenses as a household have been increasing those 10 years. What do you do? What do? You get a part-time job, maybe? Maybe your child was going to go to University of California, but you send them to Cal State, or if they were going to go to Cal State, you send them to community college, anything that you can do to reduce expenses. So there's discussion about redevelopment funds and when it was used and so on and so forth. And I know it must be confusing to the majority of you, even though we're all too familiar with it here at the dais. But I want to not get too far in the weeds and indicate that if you take away the redevelopment property tax trust fund revenues that the city has received for the last several years and look at the base property tax revenues from 2008 to 2018, that number is $106,511. That is, we receive $106,000 more in property tax revenue than we did in 2008 for base property tax, setting aside the redevelopment property trust fund monies. 10 years, $10,000 a year in the sales tax increase. And we were bumping along doing that okay until we lost our number one sales tax producer, OneSource. And so we took a hit of about $200,000. Sales tax in that 10 years with no variances. If you look at our sales tax revenues, in 5 of the previous 10 years, we've had negative sales tax proceeds as it relates to year-over-year analysis. So if we received $100 in sales tax in 2013, in 2014 we received $70 in sales tax, well, that explains that. So 5 of the 10 years have been down years for us. So that should speak to the volatility of sales tax revenue even before OneSource relocated to Riverside County. So sales tax, year-over-year increase. You look at the 2008-2009 number, and you look at the projected number for 2018, 2019, or 2017, 2018, and that number is $22,000. So divide $22,000 by 10, and what do you get? $2,000 a year, roughly, sales tax increase on average, because you had those years where there were significant negatives received. You folks do this all the time with your own household budgets. What I'm talking about here is not rocket science, even though it's complex and it's a municipal operation, but the principles are still the same. So, Lieutenant Wolf indicated 2 weeks ago and tonight that for 208 hours, I think we started paying in 2013. And our Schedule A budget with the county was approximately $1.5 million. So we received notice from the county that our law enforcement budget is going to increase by 6%. Next year's budget, 18-19, $121,000. That's in 1 year. So back up and take a broader look. From 1.5 million in 2013 to 1.9 million in 2018 and 2019. $600,000 in increased costs in law enforcement alone, never mind the other aspects of the municipal operation. $600,000. Now, compare that with what I just mentioned to you with respect to sales tax revenue received and property tax revenue received. My colleague, Mayor Pro Tem Robles, indicated at the last meeting that there was a price to pay for self-determination. This city, 40 years ago when it incorporated, could not sustain itself financially. Nothing's changed in the 40 years. The only thing that we've done is gloss over our inability to generate enough revenue like other cities without some budgetary gimmickry, using redevelopment revenues, using one-time revenues. But I can tell you that if this city encounters an economic downturn that occurred in 2008 through 2012, I don't see this city surviving. And I'd like to engage any of you, not tonight, in a discussion about why you feel it might. Because if you look at the downturn in revenues that the city incurred as a result of the Great Recession of the 2000s, and we had to go through that again with the increases that we now know are not just on the horizon but are facing us. So in addition to the $121,000 in the sheriff's contract, we have a $100,000 increase in pension liability. And there are others that approximate roughly to $371,000. So before we add any service or before we can adopt any budget, by my estimation, Mr. Duffy or Ms. Fortune can confirm one way or another, there's a $371,000 hole that must be filled in the 18-19 budget before we do anything else. So when there's intimations that we can somehow find a way to cut and find the money to fund this, that's just not the case. That's just not the case. Now, I understand when you talk about taxes that everyone's going to, their eyes are going to glaze over. And so those who are suggesting that we tax you or that the city is going to impose a tax, well, you have to listen carefully. Because what I said 2 weeks ago, same thing applies. We're only asking that you give yourself the opportunity to vote on a measure in November 2018. We cannot impose a tax on you without your permission. I repeat, we cannot impose a tax on you without your permission. All we're asking is for you to grant us the opportunity to ask you the question, will you select will you vote in favor or against whatever option that might be placed on the November ballot? I've talked to a number of people during my walks and so on forth since the last meeting. And people say, well, you know, it didn't pass last time, you know. Well, and my response is, if you don't think it's going to pass in November 2018, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? If you don't think it's going to pass, what is the problem with asking the question of Grand Terrace citizens about whether or not they want to tax themselves for enhanced law enforcement services? I would like to engage any of you personally if you believe that the current level of law enforcement service is sufficient for Grand Terrace. You heard from Lieutenant Wolf, who indicated all of these cities, same population as Grand Terrace, essentially the same geographic area from 3.5 to 4.5 square miles, and they're all averaging 8, 10, 9, 11 deputies or police officers to our 1 point something. So I'm going to conclude with what I asked you to do 2 weeks ago. One is to give us the opportunity to allow you to vote on this matter. The other is to stay engaged, not just tonight, but through November 18. Listen to the pro and con. As council members, we cannot advocate. So you hear me saying, I support your right to vote. I'm not suggesting that you vote yea or nay, but I believe that if you stay engaged, and if you keep an open mind, and if you follow the facts, that part is critical. Open mind, follow the facts. I'm willing to take my chances in November if tonight results in the council taking action to place a measure on the ballot. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councilmember Henderson. Councilmember Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm a little confused here because at first I got the impression that we weren't going to retry everything, but now we have succeeded in retrying the conversation about whether the city can survive financially or not. And when we have an agenda report that indicates that we are set before us to examine the merits of various types of tax measures local agencies can place before voters to enhance the level of services within a community and so on. So as hard as somebody has tried to avoid that conversation, somehow now it has become something I'm kind of familiar with. It's kind of like a scare tactic. You know, if you don't take care of business now, we're all going to starve to death and the city's going to fall down. I would like to stick on topic and examine the merits of the various types of tax measures, and I am fairly convinced that on packet page 203, first of all, I detest the idea of a utility tax. And the reason why I do that is because it makes no common sense, because it has no ceiling. And when we start talking about whether or not a tax is going to live for 5 or 6 years is ludicrous, because if we are indeed in that much trouble and we're going to inherit $360,000 or in excess of that amount debt per year, in addition to what we're doing now, there is no sunset. There can't be. That makes no sense. Just like somebody talks about whether or not they can, afford to keep bread on the table, it makes no sense to me to think that the way that you do that is to tax yourself. I think that this body has been fairly successful in re-examining its priorities over time, and we have looked at what our numbers are, and we have made some painful adjustments in time. But where we were in 2010, as the question has come up, we were considered in the toilet. We weren't really in the toilet so much as we were below the grade we needed to be financially for the services we needed to run the city at a minimum. We have received more revenue over time, and we are now in what you'd call in the black a little bit for a change. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not going to change, not going to degrade. More than likely it will, and that means to me that we make appropriate restructuring in order to be able to, to generate what we need. Utility tax does not work because it doesn't have an end cost. Because it's nice to say that $80 is all you're going to generate per person, but realistically, it's the same thing that was a problem last time we had a utility tax, and that is there is no end. There's not only no end realistically in time frame, but also the money just keeps accumulating. So it's nice to say that there's an average user, but the average user is not the little old lady that only runs her air conditioning once a month and only uses a quarter of a cup of water.
No, I'm 65 and I use it every day.
Excuse me, I've got the floor. Most of us don't like the heat, and we also like to water our lawns on occasion, and we've learned painfully through the Riverside Highland Water Company stepped program because they had to do some things in relation to the state mandates, that there's a difference in cost with that. Every time you start going over a little bit of a creature comfort, it starts to get much more expensive. If you've got a telephone and a telephone and a telephone and an iPad and a computer, all that stuff that the little old lady may not have, it's a different rate structure. So I think the utility tax is a waste of time and consideration, especially since it takes 2/3 of voter approval to get it to go anywhere. And then on the transactions and state tax, or, what do you call it, sales tax, you have the same inherent problem. We've got to adopt the ordinance by a 2/3 council vote, and in here you've got a 2/3 voter approval. That is also a waste of time in general.
Councilmember Wilson?
Yes.
I believe this is if there's a November ballot measure that would make it 2/3, but I think right now it's simple majority for sales tax and utility users tax. Is that correct, Mr. City Attorney?
That is correct. If the measure passes and one that you chose of these that would have taken a majority plus one were to pass, it would then automatically have to be a 2/3 if that measure passed.
But currently, sales tax and utility user is simple majority.
Correct.
Thank you, Councilmember Wilson.
Here's the difficulty that I have in relation to this. We are set to review this item on the merits of various tax situations, and the only one that looks like it's realistic is the special parcel tax.
Here, here.
Now, I'd just like to kind of, since there was a little bit of equal time shared, I think it's important to take a look at a couple of the things that help us make decisions. And I know that some of us on this dais feel like that there might be a way for us to increase the police capacity if that's what's called for. What I have not found so far is that there has been no quantifiable benefit for the one-time money that we have spent. We also know that state crime reclassifications have changed the game. And we heard that from one of our former council members who is very familiar with that situation. Our response times are still within the state guidelines. Our coverage, when we first started doing this 100 years ago, well, let's say 40 years ago, one of the big advertising situations is that we would get not double coverage, but basically one entity could cover for the other. Now, I understand it's not realistic to think that Riverside is going to cover for us. That's their own police station. But we are part of a network, and we have seen that happen over time. In other words, there's never a time when we are just desperate and without any law in the city of Grand Terrace. And if we're leaving that kind of an idea on the table, that's not correct. That's always been the sales situation in relation to the sheriffs, that they're not going to leave you in a hole. And I would like to think that that's applicable even in an emergency situation, because that's where we're really going to get the test, right? So I think we might be dealing with apples and oranges here. But personally, I think we should stick on topic, look at the special parcel tax, and let's see who votes for that.
Thank you, Councilmember Wilson. Mayor Pro Tem?
I had lost my report, so I had to reprint it, and I found a file when I had asked for position reductions by fiscal year. But because it's dated, it only goes to 2012-13. But the important thing is in 2010-11, 23.5 positions were cut. In 2011-12, there were 7. So there were 16 positions, and then 4 more were cut in 12-13. And I know the assistant city manager we restored, public safety director we restored. So, we're pretty much within that. I agree with many of the things that my colleague says about the utility tax. I'm not really fond of that either, because I don't see how you can control the cost. And I also want to say, too, that, Measure C failed, and so we had 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17, 2018, and some of my peers are saying here, well, we can cut our way through that, yet there was never any plan advanced by either one of you to cut and restore any services at police that you're very happy to host on 9213. We have, for the past 2 years, 9213, the crime's up, let's have a meeting. So we have a meeting in the community center. 9213, here we go, so we have a workshop. So it struck me as why do we keep having these workshops if we have no intention to actually doing anything about it? So to me, if you don't want to advance any cuts or actually deal with the issue, stop responding to 9213 and having workshops about it. I understand taxes. I don't like taxes. Cities, San Bernardino has Measure Z, Riverside has Measure Z, and it was all to fund more police. I wonder, Measure Z, what they do, run out of the alphabet? Yeah, I understand that. I feel that. But I go back to this city when it was founded, did not have the property tax base to do what a city needs to do to have enhanced services. This is just personal for me, because this, again, is I cannot force a tax on anybody. I can only put it on the ballot, and it's up to you, but I can have an opinion. It seems to me there's a group of people that when the library was a little van and it went through your neighborhood, and you hopped on there for your little kids and you picked out a few books, that there's a lot of people that are happy with that service. And that's fine. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, but I have people that are coming here, they want enhanced police services, and of course there's going to be some that don't, and I'm just simply giving everybody the chance to say what they want to do. And I'm willing to take the utility tax measure off the table.
Councilmember Hussey.
Well, we're pretty conservative on this this council. Let me just ask the residents, one of the reasons why we moved here to Grand Terrace and live here for generations and generations because of the quality of life here. Some of you people grew up here, went to elementary schools, and your kids went to elementary schools. I know in the high school was in Colton, but I know my wife's been here 40 some odd plus years. I won't tell her exactly, but we feel safe here. This is our town. Things have changed, like Mr. Wilson said. The state has hampered us. Governor Brown won't spend more money for prisons, so it's his way of clearing the prisons is making sure it's not a crime anymore. Unfortunately, it's still a crime when you go in somebody's house, and I don't care if you steal $1 out of their house, that's a crime. It doesn't have to be $950. And development is coming. Well, I learned on this council, development's coming, deals are made, and deals are always broken. And we could count on $100,000, $200,000 one day, and the next day we don't have it. The person changed their mind or something happened, or we don't have the money to put the infrastructure. There's always something going on. So can we rely on development? No, but we know it's coming. I know our staff works hard on it. I hear, I put on there too, Back to Blue. I'm retired, I say federal daycare. I was in prison. I took care of the inmates who got caught. But what does Back to Blue mean? This is not a saying, Back to Blue. Back to Blue is you actually sacrificing something to make sure our officers are safe, our citizens are safe. I mean, with the parcel tax, it's pretty much you're going to give up one Starbucks coffee. Now, I'll call that Back to Blue. You're actually sacrificing something to make sure this city maintains its quality of life. And one thing that gets me, on the council tonight, and I'm hoping all my fellow council members vote yes for this initiative to move forward, is we had 400 plus residents sign a petition. This was driven by the residents to bring this to the council. we get residents up here, 1 or 2 residents that want something done and the council votes unanimous for it. So we're telling 400 residents, if we don't vote yes on this, you pretty much don't mean anything to us. We're here as a city, as a government, to try to mold things and hopefully, it gets passed. Once it's out of our hands here to pay, I think it was $5,000 to put it on the ballot, which we have given other residents more than $5,000 to do their special projects. The 400-plus residents are asking for this special project for let them to be vote, and they're going to be taking it to the streets. And we're just here as a support group. So I would like to see, when we do bring this up, whatever tax we decide on, that we have a majority vote and work together on this for the residents. That's all I have.
Okay. I have Mayor Pro Tem who said that she's ready to take utility users tax off of this slate, and I'm looking for council members to let me know which one they want to entertain at this point.
I want to vote on all 3. That's my preference. And people can vote however they feel about it. But I believe the council should vote on all 3 matters, and hopefully one of the measures gets a sufficient majority to be placed on the November ballot.
I'll second.
No, you want to make the motion?
Oh, no.
I mean,
no,
I'm
did you make a
prepared to
motion?
make a motion on all 3, and the clerk will record the vote, and we'll see
Mr. City
how it plays
Attorney?
out.
Yeah, may I recommend that maybe you go one by one with each and make a motion as that you want that particular tax and see what the vote is, and then go to the next one. That would be my recommendation.
That's my suggestion.
All right. Is there a motion?
Yeah, make the motion go for all 3? Is that what you're saying?
Mr.
I'm not
City-
hearing, I'm sorry, my hearing is
Mr. City Attorney is asked to do them one at a time. So is there a particular tax you would like to make a motion on?
I move approval on the sales tax override.
I'll second that.
Okay, there's a
Madam,
Mr. Porter.
If I may, if you're going to vote on that, I do have a number of technical revisions to the documentation that I would like to put into the record. If it's a friendly amendment, I would assume that it would be. I'll let you know what they are right now. Hold on. So there are a number of places in this ordinance and the resolutions that refer to the State Board of Equalization. That should be the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration. They have since changed their name. So that would be throughout. And then second of all, in the ordinance in section 3A, the first sentence should be slightly revised. This is not the extension of existing tax, rather this is a new tax. So it should instead state to impose a retail transaction and use tax, and then it goes on from there.
Thank you, Mr. Porter.
Madam Mayor?
Mr. City
There's
Attorney.
also another question I believe one of the council members brought up at one time, is do you want a provision in that tax measure that the council would have the authority to end it without going to a vote of the people or anything? And I'll have Mr. Porter speak to that.
I apologize. Along those lines, maybe before we vote, to make clear, so my further recommendation would be section 15 and 17 would be slightly revised. It would be revised to state, the second sentence would instead read, however, no tax imposed by this ordinance shall be effective unless this ordinance, that would replace the words that tax, had been approved by the voters. And then I would add a sentence at the end of section 15 that would say, furthermore, any such tax shall be effective only as set forth in section 17 of this ordinance, and then I'll get to that. But essentially, this is to point out that we won't start collecting this tax until April 1st. The prior version of the tax said, oh, well, we're going to be starting the tax the moment that the voters approve it. That's not how this would work. So a similar change would occur to section 17. It would instead read commencement and termination. If approved by the voters, the tax imposed by this ordinance shall be levied beginning April 1st, 2019, or if such date is after April 1st, 2019, on the first day of the first calendar quarter, commencing more than 110 days after the adoption of this ordinance. The tax shall not be levied beyond March 31st, 2023, 2024, any extension of the tax beyond March 31st, 2024 shall require approval by the electorate.
And then, Mr. Porter, the item I suggested about whether or not they want a clause in there that would say that the council would have the authority to remove the tax.
That is an option. So currently, the way that this reads is that it will expire on its own terms after 5 years of the tax being collected. The other taxes, I'll just talk about this one. You have the option, if you want to, I could provide language if you want to, that would say that the city council has the right to unilaterally, without the approval of the voters, stop the collection of the tax prematurely. If you want to include that, you can. Staff recommendation is that you don't, because it's ultimately your determination, but if you want to do that, we could add that language. What you cannot do is you cannot have the right to decrease the amount of the tax. Whereas the other tax, the parcel tax, does have that option. You can change the amount that you're levying every year. This is take it or leave it. It has to be at the full rate that you approve, and then you have to cut it, or you just let it keep going.
Madam Mayor,
Councilmember Henderson.
I had inquired before the meeting whether or not the council could stop collection of any measure that was approved by the voters because of the situation in High Grove, where the publisher of the newspaper has accused the Riverside County Board of Supervisors of not providing the extra deputy, and the citizens in that area are paying, according to the publisher of the newspaper, $165 a year in a parcel tax. And so while we have a great relationship with with San Bernardino County Sheriff, and I can't imagine a situation where a deputy allocated to the city would not actually be deployed to the city, it did occur to me that if a situation like that occurred, the council might want to consider it. Now, having said all that, I would like to make an amended motion that includes Mr. Porter's comments, but more importantly, to recommend to my colleagues that we approve the transaction and use tax with an advisory measure, and hopefully I'll get a second on that. Thank you.
I second that.
Okay, motion by Councilmember Henderson for a transaction tax and the accompanying
advisory opinion.
Advisory, and a second by Councilmember Hussey. Please vote.
Motion fails with Council Members Henderson, Hussey voting yes, Mayor Pro Tem Robles voting yes, Councilmember Wilson voted no, Mayor McNichol voted no.
All right, thank you. Do we have a motion for one of the other two remaining?
Mayor, I make a motion to approve the utility users tax with the advisory opinion and with any changes that Attorney Porter feels that are relevant from the prior discussion on the transaction use tax to the utility users tax.
Second.
All right, motion by Councilmember Henderson, second by Councilmember Hussey. Please vote.
Motion fails with Council Members Henderson and Hussey voting yes, Councilmember Wilson, Mayor Pro Tem Robles, Mayor McNichol voted no.
All right, thank you. And for the final special parcel tax, is there a motion for that?
Mayor, I make a motion that the council vote to place a parcel tax as described in the staff report on the November 2018 ballot for enhanced law enforcement services.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Henderson, second by Councilmember Hussey. Please vote.
Motion passes with Council Members Henderson, Hussey, and Mayor Pro Tem Robles voting yes. Council Member Wilson, Mayor McNamara vote no.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to unfinished business, which is item number 11. This is a housing successor agency item. This is a request by Habitat for Humanity San Bernardino for short-term loan using housing funds. May we have staff report, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. My name is Sandra Molina. I'm the Planning and Development Services Director. This item is a loan agreement between the Grand Terrace Housing Authority and Habitat for Humanity San Bernardino Area, Inc. This item is consistent with our 2030 vision statement, goal number 4, to develop and implement successful partnerships by working collaboratively with private sector agencies and to deliver services benefiting our community. To give a bit of a background, on May 8th, just the last council meeting, the Housing Authority extended the construction completion date to December 31st, 2018 for the completion of 2 homes on property sold to Habitat for Humanity in 2012 for $1. At that time, the other item for consideration was to direct staff to prepare a short-term loan agreement for consideration, for the Housing Authority's consideration in the amount of $35,000. And I do want to clarify that these funds that are being proposed to be loaned to Habitat are low-mod housing funds, and their purpose is to be used to promote low-to-mod housing. So this proposed loan would be consistent with the housing fund purpose. So before the council, or excuse me, the authority this evening is a loan agreement, short-term for 6 months. It's a low-interest loan. The agreement includes a promissory note, which is a promise to pay the loan back, and a deed of trust, which is recorded on the property and basically secures the loan by using the property as collateral. The repayment of the loan would occur at the earlier of the sale or transfer or conveyance of the property, any refinancing of the property, the earlier of an issuance of a certificate of occupancy for the property, or it must be repaid by December 31st, 2018. So if any of these are to occur at that first time that this happens, any one of these items happen, then the $35,000 needs to be paid back to the Housing Authority, and it would reimburse our Housing Authority housing fund. So the recommendation is for the Housing Authority to approve the loan documents, to approve the $35,000 short-term loan, authorize the the Executive Director, Mr. Duffy, to execute the loan documents, and then also to authorize the appropriation of $35,000 from the Housing Successors Fund to fund the short-term loan. And with that, I'll complete my presentation, and I'm available to respond to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Molina. Are there any questions of staff at this time? Board Member Hussey.
So the loan's getting paid back, correct?
Yes, sir, it will be paid back.
And with the houses being made, it's going to help generate our tax revenue? It's going to
Yes,
benefit
sir.
the city?
Yes, sir.
Plus benefit the residents that are the people that have been waiting a long time for the move in that house. When did we first start this? 2 years ago?
No, sir, about 7 years ago.
7 years, all right. Thank you.
Any other questions of staff? Board Member Henderson.
Director Molina, I understand the structure for the payoff. Is there any circumstance that could occur where a certificate of occupancy is issued and the loan not be paid off? It seems to me that if you issue, if the issuance of the certificate of occupancy is one of the triggering mechanisms for loan repayment, it seems to me the issuance of the CFO precedes the loan payoff.
So let's say the homes are ready for occupancy, let's say in September. once those C of Os are being issued, the loan needs to be repaid almost simultaneously. But the occupancy is not necessarily held up because the loan hasn't been paid. The city could issue the C of O, but at that time, the loan would have to be paid.
I'm sorry. I support
Mr.
this.
City Attorney, I'm sorry, Councilmember Henderson.
May I answer, give an answer to your question? Sure. What happens is that when the certificate of occupancy under this scenario is issued, the loan is due. If they don't pay off the loan at that point, then you would have the ability to foreclose on the property because you will have a trust deed on it. And I think that partially answers the question.
That's the nature of my
Thank you for the
concern,
excuse.
Madam Mayor, is that you could have a situation, I faced this situation before, where the C of O is issued, the home is sold, and the loan is about to be paid off, but for whatever reason, it isn't paid off. And so then the local legislative body, us in this instance, has to foreclose upon these homes where these people are worked all these years and occupied the homes. So, and now we are kicking them out for homes that were built for their intended purpose. It's not a good situation to be in, and which is why I suggested at the last meeting that the condition, the certificate of occupancy be a condition precedent to loan payoff. I'm sorry, loan payoff is a condition precedent to the C of O. And normally it's handled in a situation where, through escrow instructions, the appropriate escrow instructions.
Board Member Henderson, the city attorney had another comment that he was trying to make. I'm sorry to interrupt again.
And it's along the lines of what you were saying. They would not be able to purchase the property if we have a loan on it because the bank wouldn't do it until that is cleared. And it could be in the same escrow where they pay us off and so on at the same time. But they're not going to get the money to purchase the property. So it won't be a situation where they purchase the property and then they're thrown out. It would all tap. Yes?
Wouldn't you secure the loan with a note?
Yeah. Correct. With a trustee, yes.
Yeah, so that's recorded. That runs with the land.
Correct.
So it can't be retired unless it's cleaned up in escrow.
Yeah, because I don't think a lender would lend the money unless you clear the title of these types of things.
Board Member Henderson.
Except for the affordable housing covenant, that would be when they would lend on.
I'm willing to defer to Mr. Wilson and the city attorney. I think this is a good project, and I support it. I just want to ensure that we don't face a negative public relations issue down the road.
I appreciate you bringing that forward, absolutely. Any other questions for staff? All right, hearing none, we will open it up to public comment. Are there any requests to speak on this item? Thank you. Bobby Forbes.
Bobby Forbes, Burns Avenue, Grand Terrace. I'm against this. It's been 7 years. They haven't taken care of the property. They haven't showed up. They've not done anything. Yes, the recession hit. We had bad times. We all had bad times. But when a buyer asked me for early occupancy on a home before it closes escrow, I go back to the one time that we had a major earthquake and I had a transaction stop because all escrows in the Northridge area stopped. And I had a buyer from Northridge coming to Grand Terrace to buy a home. Thank goodness my inexperience didn't let them in the house early because it would have been a disaster. Mother Nature breaks things up sometimes, messes things up. I don't know what all the problems have been with Habitat. I think it's a great program. But I don't think they need a loan for 4 months. I don't understand why they would need a loan for 4 months or 6 months or 8 months. So I'm against it. I think you're setting precedents by giving them money, just like the next subject we're going to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Forbes. Are there any other requests to speak? Okay. I'll close public comment and bring it back to the board members for deliberation and consideration of a motion.
Move approval. I'm sorry, Madam Mayor. Apologize. Move approval of the staff recommendations 1, 2, and 3.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Henderson, Board Member Henderson, second by Board Member Hussey. Please vote.
Motion passes with Board Members Henderson and Hussey voting yes, Vice Chair Robles voting yes, Chair McNamara voting yes, Board Member Wilson votes no.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to item 12, back to our City Council meeting. This is the Economic Development Incentives Agreement with the City of Grand Terrace and Woody's Classic Grill for the employment of equivalent of 20 full-time employees and estimated payroll of approximately $500,000 annually. May we have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Mayor. For the record again, G. Harold Duffy, City Manager. This is actually a public-private partnership with tonight before the council is an economic development incentive agreement to bring in new business and the benefits to increase employment and assist the business community. The city is partnering with Michael V. Miller, who has experience managing and owning the following establishments: American Road Trip Bar and Grill, Game Works in Ontario, Riverside Brewing Company, Scoreboard America Sports Grill, Harry C's Restaurant and Lounge, and Hudson Grill, and also National Sports Grill. So Mr. Miller has a new concept he wants to bring to Grand Terrace called Woody's Classic Grill. And he will be establishing so what we'll be doing is establish a cost to renovate and start operations. And when he came forward and we wanted to do the project, his original concept, he had an estimate in terms of what he was going to be doing. And when he looked at the overall project, the estimates exceeded the overall cost to renovate and start operations. So the city stepped in to bridge the gap between and by incentivizing the owner-operator to continue with the project. So I received a call from the Continental Properties, which is the owner of the property, and they indicated that they wanted to get some new signs because the operations with Mr. Miller was not going to happen because the renovation cost was too much. So then I reached out to Mr. Miller and I talked to him about maybe the city could help incentivize the project. So the owner-operator demonstrated the ability to make the venture a success based upon his experience in the past restaurant operations. So based on that, we came up with the following concept. So it's estimated that Woody's Bar and Grill will generate approximately $10,000 annually in sales tax, and it'll fill a retail sales gap in the sector that is currently at $6.4 million. That number comes from our sales tax consultant, HDL. What they're saying is that there's $6.4 million of this casual dining that's actually being spent somewhere else because the city doesn't have those options available here in town. Also, this would increase the traffic at the center and will help the other businesses. I've went to a couple of the businesses there, and we know that I forget what you call it.
New to you?
New to you, yes, new to you. They said that once the Food Connection closed, modified their hours, they saw their business go down dramatically. And so they're hoping and they're very excited that if this restaurant reopens, that it'll bring some new foot traffic back into the location. It keeps the local money in town as a part of that $6.4 million. And also increases the payroll in the community by approximately $500,000 if Woody's Bar and Grill lives up to the expectations of hiring 20 full-time equivalent employees at a minimum wage of $12 an hour, and so that equals roughly about $480,000, approximately $500,000 annually in terms of payroll. What it also did, too, is it allowed Continental Properties to secure a 10-year lease that's worth about $2 million by him signing that lease to be able to operate the facility for. It's a 10-year lease with 2 5-year options after the lease is completed. So the terms, Woody's is required to employ the equivalent of 20 full-time employees annually for at least 5 years. The city will perform an annual audit. If Woody's meets the terms, Woody's shall receive the following discounts in the loan. So year one of the base loan of $50,000, he would be required to pay $10,000. He would receive a $9,000 credit and pay the city $1,000 at the end of that year. Second year would be the same. Third year the same. Then the fourth year it goes down to a 50% share on year 4 and 5. And this is done because one of the main issues that new businesses have is liquidity in terms of being able to have the capital they need to ensure that they can continue to provide the existing services that they need for the public. So this action is consistent with the bond covenant, Health and Safety Code HSC 34194.1.4 C2A, authorizing the use of 2011 bond proceeds in accordance with the bond covenant. Approve the loan agreement with Woody Classic Grill. The amount of the loan will be $50,000. The terms of the condition of the loan would be for 5 years. Forgiveness of a portion of the loan if the operator stays in business for a minimum of 5 years. T-shirt, Grand Terrace, California. With that, I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. Are there questions of staff at this time? Okay, Councilmember Wilson and then Councilmember Henderson.
Do you have any idea what the tax realization is going to come from this? I know we've kind of kicked a few numbers around, but if we're going to make a $37,000 loan, what kind of taxes are we going to have come back to us?
Well, so you'll have an annual tax of $10,000 in sales tax come back to you. In addition, you'll have, ideally, you'll be generating a payroll of $500,000 for the year, and those employees will then spend money in town.
So it kind of sounds, unless I'm wrong, it sounds like we're going to put money out, but we're not going to get any money back other than whatever employment base happens. That's the benefit, I guess, to the community.
Well, in the initial
and the services, obviously.
Yeah, in the initial component, after the 3-year mark, you'll start to receive a greater percentage of the sales tax that comes in, and I give you the minimum of the $1 million in terms of his revenue coming in. That would be the 1%. That would be the $10,000. He could do even more. That's what the Food Connection was doing at its heyday. Now, the Food Connection didn't offer beer and wine like he will at this point in time.
And I guess my last question would be, traffic-wise, since that seems to be a difficulty we get a lot of pass-through traffic, but I'm a little concerned about $1.2 million projected revenues when that works out to about, I think I remember it's like $3,800 worth of clear per day, which is a pretty healthy chunk of cash in a city of 13,562 people.
Well, the numbers that we are projecting are not numbers that he projected. The numbers that we are projecting is based on the historical data that the Food Connection had generated in the past. Okay. And so we believe that, with 28,000 cars per day on one end, and on the other end, on Mount Vernon, 27,000 cars on the other end, we think that based upon the history of the Food Connection, that those numbers that we provided are actually conservative and not very liberal.
And we're not going to slow down the road so people decide that they're going to stop in instead of just driving through, huh?
Well, I'm hoping that with this concept that he has, that it should be a generator. We're seeing that happen with Kaz Ramen now. We're seeing people come from all over, Riverside, Loma Linda, because of the product that he has. And I think that this might be the case also.
Then you beg the question, and thank you. So what is his demographic circle?
Mr. Miller is actually here. And he's very welcome to come up and answer any questions you have in terms of his business model or concepts that you
Would you like him to come up?
Please.
Mr. Miller?
Mayor, council members, thank you for having me.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Michael Miller, and I am the gentleman trying to open Food Connection again.
First, let me say, Mr. Miller, that I really appreciate your pursuing this situation, because we definitely need a terrific restaurant. And I have sampled your other location, and it was an enjoyable experience.
Good.
And I think it's neat that you're looking to do something a little different, but not so different that the public can't consume it.
Yeah, can I tell you a little history behind why I'm here? In the early 90s, I actually lived in Grand Terrace, and I bartended at a place that originally was Chez Olay, then went to Gina's, and then went to JB's. I did that for 5 years, so I know Grand Terrace, and it's kind of like coming home again. I knew the Food Connection. I knew what they did in the very early beginning. So the potential's there.
Well, I also
Definitely.
saw your resume includes a stint at the Cask and Cleaver, too.
Cask and Cleaver years ago, yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I guess my question is just centered on one item, and that is, what's your demographic? What do you visualize? Because I know, so far as a business plan, a formal business plan per se, that's really not your gig. But what's, where you think you're going to be drawing from?
Well, let me start by talking a little bit about the other restaurant. Yucaipa has about 56,000 people population, and that 56,000 people are divided among 6 restaurants that are considered full service. So if you take that divided by 6, it brings it down to about what Grand Terrace is, around 13,000. So the business is here. We know that we can do the business. My estimation is that we're going to do more like 1.5 million a year. And that also drawing in people from Loma Linda, from Colton, from Riverside. I think that all helps the city of Grand Terrace. And as those people come here, hopefully they're spending money, at all the other businesses here.
Well, it's a great vision.
Yeah, and to answer your question, we are a family restaurant. We're geared towards kids all the way up to great-grandparents.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you for answering my questions.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have just a couple observations, maybe a question for Mr. Miller, and some comments on the project itself. I noticed in your resume, sir, that you spent some time in San Bernardino, Gate City Beverage, and maybe, I don't recall you specifically, but maybe our paths crossed because we issued a industrial development revenue bond to Gate City Beverage in the late 80s. So if you had any contact with the with the San Bernardino Redevelopment Agency, it would have been as part of that particular transaction.
Yeah, at that time I was just a salesman, so I didn't interact in that way. Although I did grow up in Highland, so I know San Bernardino also.
Sure. Your resume is impressive. I want to just offer a couple of comments. First, I want to commend Mr. Duffy for jumping on this opportunity in a way, because anyone who's done economic development at the local government level knows that timing is critical, and timing doesn't always work out well with city council meetings or board of supervisors meetings or what have you. So the other specific comment I want to make is that we have a vision. We have the 2030 vision, and it talks about promoting or maintaining public safety, and we're attempting to address that, even if we've encountered some obstacles. It also indicates promoting economic development is one of our 5 pillars in the adoption of our 2030 vision. It's in the back, it's out front, it's part of our agenda packet, and I think we as council members have to do more than pay lip service to that particular vision. We have opportunities to address that vision, and this is one of those opportunities. The other comment I'd like to make is that the proposed loan is from redevelopment bond proceeds, and we must adhere to the bond covenants associated with the use of those monies. In the redevelopment law, there is a provision called the but-for clause. But for the intervention of the redevelopment agency, the private sector acting alone cannot make this project happen. And so this is a perfect use of the funds that we have for this purpose that can't be used for any other general government purpose. And it's important that the viewing audience and the people here tonight understand that. This is a good use of the monies. Mr. Miller has a remarkable resume, and the one thing you'd like to know about a restaurant operator, because it's a cutthroat business, is their experience and their success or lack thereof in the business. And I think he's answered those questions, for me at least, with the submission of his resume. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
All right. Thank you, Councilmember Henderson. Are there any further questions? Councilmember Hussey.
Hello, Mr. Miller.
Hello.
I've been frequently your restaurant in Ukaipa for a long time eating all-you-can-eat steak and shrimp. Well, the shrimp. So.
Yeah, Thursday night.
But when I go there, not only you're a big supporter of community with I see the football teams, the high school sports, and I know we have a car club and everything right here, and hopefully you'll be taking care of that, because I would like to see, because you know how Route 66 is gone, maybe even Route 215 or something in Grand Terrace that's going to generate additional revenue and additional things for us, especially during the community events that we have coming up. But I wanted to say, just a comment, that us being on the council, we only get paid so much, but when we're out there and about, we're always looking for things to bring in new ideas for the city. And when we got Mr. Duffy, I go, you got to check out American Road Trip, because this fits our city perfect. And I was kind of, I love your restaurant, but I don't want to go to Ukaipa anymore. It's a long drive, but I want our tax dollars to stay here if it works out. But I know, because we always look at, let's look at Cracker Barrel, let's look at high-end places, but it's the mom and the pop places that, and this city is so unique, I think it makes it successful. And I think, basically that, I think you're sitting on a gold mine, my own personal opinion, because we have the development in High Grove. We have La Loma Hills that people want to shop here. We have Colton, still they want to come here. We have Loma Linda, because we have a successful restaurant here. I think all our restaurants are pretty successful, and they have a pretty good crowd. But hopefully I'm looking forward to working with you and, visiting your establishment if everything works out all right. But thank you for coming out here tonight.
Thank you.
Did you have a question, Councilmember Hussey?
My question is, are you going to have the steak and all-you-can-eat shrimp?
Absolutely.
All right,
absolutely. All the specials we have there, we'll bring here.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, I have, because I don't think it can be stated enough. So what is the source of these revenues?
So the source of the revenues are the bond proceeds. It is the 5 and the 15% of the bond proceeds which the state allocated the city to be able to
But
utilize.
they're redevelopment.
Yes.
Redevelopment agency bonds.
Yes.
That, with the exception of the mayor that were voted in, she's the only one that was on the council that voted for these bonds. So, I just want to make sure that people know that this is redevelopment agency bonds that were floated. The only one sitting here that voted for those is the mayor. None of us were here. We may not agree or disagree on what redevelopment is, but this is where the only place it can be spent. And then I'm just going to say what my feeling is that since this is where it only can be spent, since we have a shopping center, unless you want to worry about traffic and just tear it down because they can't make turns in there easily, we need to do something about that. And I think this is a good project, and I support it.
Did you have any further questions, Mayor Pro Tem?
No.
Okay, thank you. Mr. City Manager. of the bond proceeds that would be used for this, it would be the 5% that we already have? Do we have any of that left over?
We actually do have about $50,000 left over from the original 5%.
Okay, because I thought I saw that it was contingent on us being able to spend the 15%.
It is written that way, and I checked with the attorney, and that is just to cover you in case you didn't have enough, but it doesn't prohibit you from using your existing balance of your bond proceeds.
Okay. And not that I believe or am saying anything about your abilities, Mr. Miller, but as we have it structured, there are certain things that the restaurant needs to do and Mr. Miller needs to do to get the discount through the different years.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if there's a point in like the first year where there aren't as many employees that are supposed to be hired and some of the other qualifications based on not building up the business as quickly as possible, how will this $9,000 credit be paid back? So in other words, what I'm saying is if there's not the qualification to get the now $9,000 credit, how will we believe that there is an opportunity for it to be paid?
So one of the things that we do in terms of reviewing the data is that, you know, in the restaurant business, there could be ebb and flows in terms of their high season. So that's why we say the equivalent, the 20-hour equivalent, 20 employee equivalent, because we'll look at all that particular data. If he doesn't meet the deadline for year one, the balance and the interest will continue to accrue.
Okay.
And then he would then have to pay us that next component the next year. And we also have there's a form that's required that we're securing the loan with too, that we would have the ability to, if we think that this is not working out, we can seize those assets.
Okay. Not that I'm thinking that's the case.
Okay.
When we did the projections based on historical for Food Connection,
yes,
was the period of performance we looked at during the time when Stater Brothers corporate offices were just down the street?
Yes, so we looked at the entire period of time, and we also had to make some projections too when Food Connection actually started to reduce this number of hours. So we looked at all of those, and that's why we came up with our estimate of $1 million a year versus his estimate of 1.3, 1.5.
Okay, thank you. That's the last of my questions. Thank you
That's
very
it.
much.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate you being here tonight and wanting to invest in our community. I'm going to open it up to public comment or the request to speak. Bobby Forbes.
Thank you. Bobby Forbes, Burns Avenue. I will eat at that restaurant, but I don't think we should loan him any money. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Forbes. And that was our last request to speak, so I will close public comment and bring it back to council for consideration of a motion.
And Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to the City Council approve the Economic Development Incentive Agreement with Woody's Classic Grill located at 22400 Barton Road, formerly Food Connection, in the amount of $50,000. Number two, the council makes a finding that the loan serves as a public interest by increasing local employment opportunities and filling retail tax leakage in the city of Grand Terrace. Therefore, the council finds that the public benefit of the increased employment opportunity and increase of sales tax outweighs the private benefit of the loan. And three, adopt a resolution of the City Council of the City of Grand Terrace approving the expenditures of bond proceeds.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Hussey, second by Councilmember Wilson. Please vote.
Motion passes unanimously with Council Members Henderson, Hussey, and Wilson voting yes, Mayor Pro Tem Robles voting yes, and Mayor McNabo voting yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Miller. We'll move to item 13, annexation to the Landscape and Lighting Assessment District 89-1, annexation number 4, engineers report, and the levy of assessment. Director Alan French.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening, Council, Mayor Pro Tem, Alan French, Director of Public Works, here to present this item for you.
which is the annexation of final map 18071, submitted by Jason Carger into the Landscaping and Lighting Maintenance District. This item supports 2030 goal number 1, ensuring fiscal viability through cost recovery of services. The tentative map was approved back in 2014 and was accepted last month. By the council. At this time, the map can now be annexed into the Landscape and Lighting Maintenance District. This will be for costs for a basin. He has a water quality basin in this lower corner. And then he has landscaping that's over the Metropolitan Water District easement that needs to be maintained, as well as an access road on the back lots. They also for some street trees as well. The engineer's report provided estimates the cost for maintenance of those facilities, and the owner has also submitted the consent form for the annexation to be and to be included into the city's LNLMD. Staff is recommending adoption of the resolution, initiate proceedings for annexation of the track into the 89-1 Landscape and Lighting Maintenance District. Also receive and approve the engineer's report to receive and approve the landowner's consent. And finally, staff recommends to adopt the resolution of the City Council declaring its intent to annex the track into the Lighting and Landscape Maintenance District. Order the improvements and declaring the right to levy and collect assessments per the Streets and Highways Code. I did fail to mention that for the first recommendation to adopt the resolution to initiate the proceedings. So I'm happy to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you, Director French. Are there any questions of staff? Councilmember Henderson.
Director French, this is the Carger 17 lot subdivision, right?
Yes, sir.
And he's the single owner, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this is a straightforward annexing into the district, and the purchasers of the lots and the homes are made aware of the assessment as a part of the purchase process, correct?
Yes, sir. And Jason Carger is here for any other questions, but he is the sole owner, and at this time, he is the only owner.
Yeah, I asked only because it's important that I was fairly sure it was a straightforward process. This is typical of landscape maintenance and assessment districts. So thank you for your responses.
Mr. Duffy, you had a comment?
Yes, I did, Mayor. I want to make sure that we really clearly identify this project. These are premium homes that we're building here. And one of the things with annexing to the district is that unlike maybe 5 years ago where we have the developer build the lots and put the light poles in, and then we put them in the district, and we end up running out of money because of the electricity costs and so on. This annex district is built in where there's an ongoing escalation, so to ensure that we don't end up supporting the infrastructure that's put in forward. But those are premium homes that are going to be really nice asset for that area in Grand Terrace.
Great, thank you, Mr. Duffy. Any other questions? Councilmember Hussey.
I'm trying to read this map to see where this is located at.
Sorry, Councilman.
Pico and what?
East of Oriole. It's across from the convent.
Oh, okay.
With the water tower.
Church. All right. Thank you. I was just trying to get, Pico's a big street. I'm trying to okay. All right, thank you. That's all I had. Thank you.
Any further questions? Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just have a brief comment. Just from a historical perspective, I met Mr. Carger when I was an employee of the city and met with him and the engineer from Riverside Highland Water Company. But I want to commend Mr. Carger for working through significant hurdles with the State Department of Water Resources and its whole easements and issues and so on and so forth. And it was a project that there was a lot of doubt whether it was going to come forward. So that was 3 years ago when I met with Mr. Carger, and the Planning Commission approved the tentative, and the council has done its part. So those 17 homes, as Mr. Duffy has indicated, is going to provide executive-style homes in Grand Terrace, which is a big need from my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Henderson. Any further questions? All right, I will open it to public comment. Do we have any requests to speak? No request to speak. We'll close public comment and bring it back to council for consideration of a motion.
I'll move the item.
Second.
Motion by Mayor Pro Tem Robles, second by Councilmember Henderson. Please vote.
Motion passes unanimously with Council Members Henderson, Hussey, and Wilson voting yes, Mayor Pro Tem Robles voting yes, and Mayor McNiba voting yes.
All right, thank you. We'll move to the city manager communication.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be very brief. Just wanted to remind the council and the citizens about the enforcement special notice. In June, enforcement on no parking on street sweeping days will begin at 9 a.m. in residential neighborhoods. This is a test program because we know that there's some areas of the city that are underparked. And so what we're trying to do is allow, if you don't have a place to park and you have to go to work, we're trying to provide a better time frame for you. So we'll test this out and see if it works. So we'll move forward with that. Also, too, we ran across an issue with a resident saying that they have contractors that come by their home, provide service, and they receive this a citation for street sweeping. And so we want everyone to know that if you have a contractor that comes to your house and they do receive a citation, if they have a valid business license in the city, they can always come down to City Hall, and we will waive that ticket because they were providing services as a contractor to a resident in the city. Also, just to mention that the Veterans Wall of Freedom Memorial Day event was going to be on Monday, May 28, 2018. Ceremony starts at 10 a.m., and so we encourage residents to attend that great event. And also, one of the things is that Grand Terrace Days is going to be occurring on Saturday, June 2nd from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. There'll be food, entertainment, the kids zone, pet adoptions, vendor booths, soccer, and sign-ups and games at Richard Rollins Park at 22745 DeBerry Street.
Right.
And I think that's my last slide. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. Our last item is a closed session. So we will be recessing to closed session for a conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, initiation of litigation pursuant to paragraph 4 of subdivision D of section 54956.9, one potential case. For those of you who are leaving, thank you all for being here tonight. And our next regular city council meeting will be held on Tuesday, June 12th, 2018 at 6 p.m. Agenda item request must be submitted in writing to the city clerk's office no later than 14 calendar days preceding this meeting. At this time, we are in recess. Convene to open session. Council met in closed session in conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, initiation of litigation pursuant to paragraph 4 of subdivision D of section 54956.9, one potential case. There are no reportable actions. Direction was given to staff. And at this point, we will adjourn our meeting to the next regular City Council meeting, which will be held on Tuesday, June 12, 2018 at 6 p.m. Agenda item requests must be submitted in writing to the City Clerk's office no later than 14 calendar days preceding the meeting. We are adjourned.